Today on the Rise of the Challenge podcast.
I think it was also just the first time that there was a challenge that I couldn't quite get, and it took me like a month to get. I wasn't used to that from gymnastics, I feel like, because the way we were kind of taught skills. I mean, I have a hard time even remembering what that was like, but I just remember it was a lot more streamlined than that. It was like everything had a progression. It was blah, blah, blah. It's very, very specific way of doing it. Whereas with parkour, you could be working on a challenge for hours and hours and hours, and you realize, wow, I've been at this for several hours.
Welcome to the Rise of the Challenge podcast. Joined today, she's a stunt woman, actress, parkour champion, and podcast host. It's Sydney Olson. How are you doing today, Sydney?
I'm doing excellent. Thank you so much for having me.
We are so excited to have you on the show to talk about your Rise to the Challenge. What we'd like to do with all of our guests is go right to the beginning. Talk about where you're from and what you like doing growing up.
So, I'm originally from a small town in Washington State called Port Orchard, Washington. When I lived there, there was about 10,000 people in the city. It's grown a lot since then, but I'm from a very small town. And I actually loved doing flips from a very, very young age. I started doing them around 6 or 7 years old. I was always a very hyperactive kid and a very ambitious kid too. No matter what I was doing, I always put everything into it. So even if it came down to like playing a video game or something, I was like, I have to defeat this boss. It was very intense. And so in the grass, I remember I have a very vivid memory of feeling my first time in like the flow state. And I was, yeah, about 7 years old. And I was doing some flips in the grass. I was doing a round off back handspring, and I was trying to take away my hands from the last back handspring so it could be a backflip. And I didn't have any gymnastics experience yet. It was just something that I learned on my own. And so the whole time I'm thinking, if I just take my hands away, it's a backflip. And I'd go and I'd land on my neck, I'd get back up, I'd try again. And there was just like this, yeah, it was just this connection with what I was meant to be doing in that moment. And I always go back to that when I think about the passion that I feel for just movement. And I always think of that. But yeah, basically, that was just kind of me in a nutshell as a kid, as I very much was passionate about movement from a young age.
With doing movement, flips, and stuff, were you able to find certain activities that kind of incorporated the passion that you have and being able to do both?
Yeah, I would say because I started gymnastics, yeah, around 7 years old, but I also was doing soccer and all that because I wasn't the normal kid that could like sit down and learn. I had ADHD from a very young age, though I didn't get diagnosed with it until adulthood, but it was very obvious that I was someone that struggled with that. And so I think for me, movement was also learning. Like I very much am a kinesthetic learner. So if I'm actually doing something, then that's the way that I learn it. So I guess I don't know if that answers the question, but yeah.
No, because I think a lot of times I was similar. Like it's almost like you learn from actions than reading and PowerPoints and things like that. And I feel like I'm similar in that way where I hate sitting in a chair reading it. Give me like the action and let me do it, and I will learn on the go. Kind of like street smarts versus book smart,
Oh,
kind of.
yes. Yes,
I
definitely.
I can just imagine if you were playing soccer, you're just doing a flip like a Pele kick and you're just kicking it and flipping it. I think viral video going viral at that time, that would be what I would think you would be doing.
I mean, I was pretty young when I started soccer. I actually did that before gymnastics. So I was that kid that was either picking daisies in the goal place. Yeah, I hated being goalie, so I would just like sit there and be completely distracted. Or I was like the forward player that was like pushing other girls out of my way to get that soccer ball in the goal. It was very much like with the ADHD, the ability to hyper focus. And that was the scenario in which if you're giving me something to do and I'm figuring it out for myself, that's like where I can put all of my focus in.
As you're growing up, who were the big motivators for you? Who were the inspirations in your life?
That's a good question. I feel like it changed so much throughout my life. I always kind of had someone that I looked up to. I had my coaches when I was a kid that were just still able to do flips in their 50s. And I always kind of looked at that. I'm like, I want to make sure that I can still do that. There was my older sister. She's the one that kind of I just wanted to be just like when I was a little kid. She's 3 years older than me, and we have such a great relationship now. There was always my parents. I was always very inspired by them. My mom being such a caring, passionate person, and my dad being very ambitious and does absolutely anything he puts his mind to. And so I feel like the people that were just well within my circle were actually more of who I wanted to be like than anyone that I'd see on TV.
That fun question we're always asked growing up is what is that dream job? Growing up, what was that dream job for you?
So it's interesting. I actually wanted to be an actress from a very young age.
Okay.
And yeah, and it was funny because I think when I was around 10, I found out what a stunt performer was. And it was very apparent to me because I was already doing flips and very aware of my body. I always knew that if I was going to be doing acting, I would be doing my own stunts. But it's funny how it became more of the opposite, where I'm a stunt woman that sometimes does my own acting.
Was injuries and kind of that like extreme daredevil kind of mindset ever a factor for you?
It's funny. I didn't have serious injuries until I got into parkour. I grew up in my childhood. I did get my hip dislocated, but it was more from one of my coaches sitting on me while I was in the splits. It was
Oh,
never like from anything that I initiated. And so, in adulthood, no, I wouldn't say that they came from like the daredevil mindset. More of my injuries have been when I just wasn't paying attention rather than like pushing myself to go too soon. I literally have a scar on my forehead from doing a flip into a foam pit, but I like somehow went sideways and hit a metal pole. So a lot of the injuries that I've had have not been from the courageous, I'm taking a chance on myself. No, they've been from times where I wasn't paying attention, wasn't being very present.
so that moment with the hip dislocation, a lot of times in a Rise the Challenge, sometimes people will be like, oh, I'm not going to do this anymore. I don't want to continue. How did you get back up and continue? Because looking at where your career has gone, you didn't let that stop you. You still kept on going.
To be quite honest, that injury probably was one of the things that made me quit gymnastics. Um, so I quit gymnastics around 14 years old. I think that hip injury happened around the same year. And at the time, it was kind of a blessing in disguise because gymnastics wasn't really it for me. Like I was competitive for about 7 years, but it wasn't ever really, I think, in my mind what I was meant to be doing in my fullest expression because it was very curated. All the routines are kind of made up for you. And there's not really any kind of individuality in the sport. Like obviously you're competing for yourself and all that, but at the same time it's about perfection and I was never going to be perfect. So I think I really struggled with the gymnastics mentality in that. But I can honestly say that from my experience in parkour, and I got several injuries down the road doing that, and it was just never even a thought to give up, to be quite honest. It was just like, okay, I need to heal this so I can get back to training. And I think when you have something that you're truly passionate about, I mean, of course, there are those times where maybe you do want to give up because something's hard, but when it's the right thing, honestly, like it's just not even a thought. I was just always like, yep, definitely gonna get back to it and I'll come back stronger.
You mentioned how wanting to be an actress. Did you pursue going into education, wanting to go down that ride and learn even more? Or did you go into the workforce right away?
No, so when I was, how old was I when I first said that? I don't know, I was pretty young. And so I wanted to be an actress then and there, like as a child, up in my small town. And the best case scenario we could do is like go over to Seattle and like sign up with an agency that turned out to actually be a scam. But my parents were always, they were actually quite smart when I think about it. And I'm glad that they did this. I know this wouldn't be everyone's preferable way of going about it, but my parents always told me, for now, you're going to focus on school, you're going to do this. And then when you're 18, you can make those decisions on your own. And so I think over time, the idea of being an actress kind of went to the wayside because I just didn't really see it as a possibility for me, sadly. But I became a nursing assistant. I was going to go into the realm of nursing. I changed what I was passionate about many times as a teenager, just full on identity crisis. And so I became a nursing assistant, realized I'm definitely not passionate about this. This is very hard. And then I actually moved to China for a while and taught English for an entire year when I was 20. And it was then that I had already been training parkour for 3 years, and I became aware of like stunt people again because a lot of stunt people were also parkour athletes. And there's someone that I can think of, Lucy Romberg, who's now one of my mentors and a great friend of mine, but she was someone that very much inspired me back then. And so I was like, oh, she's doing that thing that I wanted to do when I was younger. I'd love to do that. And so shortly after, I moved back to America and moved back to that small town of mine and ended up going to a competition up in Canada where I met several stunt people. And then I ended up working not too long after that. It took a long time to actually get started on the career and all that. But yeah, I would say my workforce was odd jobs for a while, working at Starbucks, being a barista, being a gymnastics coach, and then yeah, also coaching parkour and being a nursing assistant before I actually got into doing something I was very passionate about.
Would you say at the time that you were really getting into parkour that that kind of concept wasn't really where it is today, where you see all the different shows, the videos, the content, the kind of the companies that are being created with parkour? Was that something you noticed that it wasn't really at a mainstream level when you started?
Oh yeah, and definitely back then because I was 17 when I started, and that was sadly a long time ago now, about 14 years ago. Was it? Yeah, almost 15 years ago. And when I first came across it, I had never heard of it before in my life, but there was some guys that were coming into the gymnastics gym that I was coaching at, and they were doing all sorts of weird flips that I had never seen before. I'm like, "What are you guys doing? That looks really fun." And so I started joining them, and it brought back that passion that I felt like I had missed from gymnastics, where suddenly I was trying to do all these flips that I knew about and hadn't trained for years on concrete. And so it brought a whole nother level of trust in your body. And seeing the sport grow over time, it's definitely become a lot more mainstream than it used to be. Like I can talk to most people now and they know what parkour is, where maybe if they're like a lot older, in their like 70s or something, they're like, what is that? But most people actually do know what it is now. And it's been really cool to go from nobody knowing what it is to pretty much everyone knowing what it is.
Going down your memory lane with parkour, when the first few years, is there a moment that kind of stands out for you that really was kind of like a wow, this is this is something I enjoy, I love doing?
Oh, I'm trying to think of what that moment was because I feel like there was so many of them. But at first, when I started training, I was trying to impress a guy. I'm not gonna lie. There was a guy there, and I ended up dating him for about 8 years after that. But I at first was just doing it to try and like impress him. And then I remember that I think he was on a trip or something for a while, and I was still training, and I was like really enjoying it. And I just remember thinking like, oh wow, yeah, this is something that I really like to do. And I think it was also just the first time that there was a challenge that I couldn't quite get, and it took me like a month to get. I wasn't used to that from gymnastics, I feel like, because the way we were kind of taught skills. I mean, I have a hard time even remembering what that was like, but I just remember it was a lot more streamlined than that. It was like everything had a progression. It was blah, blah, blah. It's very, very specific way of doing it. Whereas with parkour, you could be working on a challenge for hours and hours and hours, and you realize, wow, I've been at this for several hours and I'm still enjoying it. Like I still have that in me that thinks I'm going to get it on the next try. And so I think that's kind of what it was that really inspired me.
Is there a challenge in your parkour career right now that you have not hit, but you know one day you're going to hit it?
It's so interesting you asked that. I don't train as much as I used to. So, because as I said, it's been almost 15 years and I've shifted a lot of focus in my time. I hadn't been training it quite as much, but now I'm doing this thing where I started this. Well, I've had this YouTube channel for a long time, but I started a new series on YouTube where I'm looking at old videos of mine and trying those things again that I used to be able to do so easy. And this has brought back a lot of excitement for me because I got to say, the last year or so, I just haven't even been excited to train. I've been doing so many other things, but this has been really fun for me. And one of them is actually a move called a double cork. And I did it on concrete back in 2017. And I landed it a few times, but ultimately I got hurt doing it one time. It was, I think I tore my ACL partially anyway, not the full thing, but I haven't done it on concrete since. And I would love to do that sometime in the next year. So that is something that I just want to come back to and be able to do again and stomp it, for real this time.
With parkour, sometimes it's the location that plays a really fun, like makes that atmosphere fun to even try different tricks and stuff. Do you have a signature spot that you go to, or when you look back at all the areas you have gone, that memorable one?
The memorable one would probably be Freeway Park in Seattle because it's one of the first places that I ever tried anything outside. And it's just a really fun spot. Like there's so many things to do. You would never run out of things to try. And I mean, obviously I don't get trained there very much. I live in Los Angeles, so I can only go there when I go up to visit family. But I would say that spot has a lot of fun memories of me trying new things. And then the other one would be Tempest South Bay, which doesn't exist anymore, sadly, but that gym was basically my home for a few years. I was there all of the time, so much so that I would like meal prep and bring my meals to the gym and like
Wow.
eat them throughout the week when I was there. But yeah, I miss that place so much because I would constantly be trying new things. It was really where I discovered a lot of my potential within parkour was that gym. So yeah, I really miss it.
With the Rise of the Challenge story, we love when guests connect with previous guests of ours. And one of those guests was Jesse LaFleur. And you guys did a show called Ultimate Tag. Talk about that opportunity and what did that do for you? What was exciting? What was the challenges? And kind of post that because a lot of times people who watched it are like, is there a season two even going to come out? It would be the perfect show to make a season two because to us as viewers, it's a simple concept, but there probably was a lot more behind the scenes that we don't know, obviously.
Yeah, there was. I mean, Ultimate Tag, I originally went and tried out obstacles for them in the pilot episode that they had, the thing that never got aired. They were just basically had it as a concept and they were seeing if it worked. And so I went out there with a few friends and we were just having a load of fun, like playing tag on these ridiculous obstacles. And so then they told me that in a few months' time, we were going to actually make the show a reality, and they definitely wanted to have me on as a tagger. But then as things got closer, Fox decided they did not want me as a tagger. I didn't have the strong enough personality for them at the time. And so they decided they were going to bring me on as a producer. And so what that meant is I was going to help people learn how to do parkour, all of the contestants, all of the taggers to make sure that they could do it safely because let's be real, like a lot of those obstacles are super dangerous. And it
Yeah.
was like, I would sit there on the sidelines and be like, I hope they're going to be okay. Because I mean, parkour can be very unforgiving if you don't know what you're doing. Like, even just hitting your shin on a block hurts. And
Yeah.
I had a big job to teach these people how to interact with the obstacles really well. And that was super fun. And then when the show actually started, they realized they actually needed more parkour athletes. So they brought me on as a tagger as well. And I was very grateful for that. It was super fun. I've never done a job like that ever in my life, where you're just literally playing tag and it's a game show. So it didn't feel as serious, but at the same time, it felt like there was also these like devastating consequences if things didn't go the way you want it to. And so it was live and it had a big audience. So yeah, I just wanted to do a great job and it ended up being, like I said, just very, very fun. And as far as I know, there isn't going to be a season two, sadly, but I have heard that they've been airing it in other countries now. And I think Australia had their own version of Ultimate Tag, and there was a few others I think that were doing that as well.
It's interesting you talked about how Fox didn't think you had the personality, but your character's name really showcases a personality with Spitfire. So
Yeah.
it's kind of interesting how they didn't think it, but then the producers and creative was like, we're going to give her this name, which
Yeah.
definitely showcases a personality. Did you like that name, the concept behind it, the kind of like the creative aspect?
I did. I thought it was very fitting, actually. I think what Fox was trying to say with my personality, because obviously you have the showrunners and the people that I'm talking to, and then you have the big wigs there that are like making those, executive decisions. But I think it was just from my audition. I was very reserved and like back then definitely didn't have the personality that I have now. But it was just like once I actually got to be in the show and have the name Spitfire and everything, I was like, oh yeah, this is exactly who I am. Like I'm very tough and like rough around the edges and can be very intense. And so it was just fun to play into that a little bit more. And I feel like a lot of people had very specific characters on that show where they had to kind of do a lot more acting, whereas I felt like I was just playing up who I already was.
Was that like your first kind of opportunity with big mainstream TV, like really being on like a weekly show, or were there other opportunities that were kind of in that realm?
I did have experiences with other TV shows that were in the mainstream. At that point, I had already worked on like NCIS Los Angeles as an actress, actually. It was a very small role, Vanessa Brown. And I was basically just an ex-cop that was kind of crooked and stuff. And so I've had experiences with that. And then, but yeah, I guess Ultimate Tag kind of was the first like series run that I had ever done.
You talked about living in Los Angeles, and it's usually the location where competition is very heavy. How does that play an effect for you with competition, going out for tryouts or getting opportunities in general?
Yeah, it's definitely plays a huge role. And what I have decided that I need to do with it is go into the audition, embody my most confident self, and just leave it at the door. Act as if it just didn't happen because you're going to get told no many, many times. And that's okay. It never actually means anything about you as a person. A lot of times it didn't even mean that you did a bad job at the audition. Sometimes it's just not the look that they were looking for. You know, sometimes they wanted someone with facial hair or something like that, or, someone that is blonde or whatever it may be. So a lot of times it's not anything that you can control. So I've really learned to just know who I am and know that I am doing my best and doing a good job with that. And then I really can't complain about any opportunities that didn't come my way because I've always sort of seen it as the opportunities that are really meant for me won't pass me. So anything that didn't come to me wasn't really meant for me. They were meant for someone else.
If you told Sydney at a young age who said, I'm going to be an actress and kind of live that lifestyle, would that Sydney be proud of who she is today and kind of fulfilling that kind of dream?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, she'd be very proud. God, she would just be completely over the moon that I was still able to flip and everything better than she was. It was that was like a major thing that I remember like writing in my journals as a kid is like I want to make sure that I can still do flips when I'm in my 30s, 40s, 50s and that was like a really important thing for me. And yeah, that version of me that wanted to be an actress when I was a kid, I actually recently got to play an acting role on a major show. And again, acting at this point isn't really something that I care about pursuing anymore. It's more of stunts. I really enjoy that. But every once in a while, you get these opportunities to do more stunt acting. And so this character, I can't even say what it is yet, but it'll come out sometime next year. And I had dialogue and everything. And it went from complete imposter syndrome to feeling very comfortable by the end of the week that I was on that show. And I remember at the end of the day when we had wrapped, and I was just completely overcome with gratitude and felt like a lot of appreciation from my inner child that was just like, she would have been so stoked to be living that dream.
With all those opportunities, even including that one that eventually will get shown, do you keep like a memory, like a film, photos, anything like that? I guess social media nowadays would be that kind of memory wall. But is there something that you're doing personally to reminisce on all these opportunities that you've had?
That's a great question. And I feel like that should definitely be something that I'm thinking more about as I'm doing it. Because really, what happens is I have the opportunity and like maybe I'll take a picture here and there, like on set or something like that. But I think a lot of times it's so easy for us to forget all the things that we've done. And a lot of times, like I journal almost every day, so those can sometimes be the memories, but a lot of times I'm just journaling like how I feel in the
Mhm.
moment. So a lot of times, like I don't even remember exactly what happened, but that's something that I would definitely love to keep track of more. I want to like just write down maybe like each time I have an opportunity like that so I can remember what it was.
I think that's so like even nowadays with technology and stuff, it's like we have those opportunities to see a photo or a video. And like even for me doing the show, it's like I've done this for almost 4.5 years and I can go back to like every episode and see, wow, that is what I looked like and how I was at that. And now where I am today. And it's kind of for you as a parkour athlete and a stunt woman and an actress. It's like you see the growth and evolution that you've taken to where you are today. What's that next challenge you're wanting to accomplish next in your career? Is there a fun opportunity, a fun gig that you're like, this is where I hope to be, and I know I'm going to get there?
Yeah, that's a great question. Also, good questions. I feel like it used to be very important for me to have these challenges and these goals that I wanted to like accomplish one by one and kind of make a checklist. But I think the thing that I've realized most in the last couple of years is that oftentimes these things that I'm hoping to achieve don't actually give me what I think they're going to give me. What I want to do more of is actually just be completely self-accepting of where I'm at. And of course, there's certain things like I'd love to win a Taurus Award, which is like basically stunt version of the Oscars.
Cool.
And I'd love to win an Emmy for stunts because they do that now. But and I know that I'll get there eventually, but it's more of just right now, I want to make sure that I'm just being more present. That's like my goal is to make sure that I'm being more present and fully enjoying these things as they are because I've had a lot of experiences in my life where I'm so focused on the goal that once it happens, I'm like completely baffled, like what's next? What just happened? I don't even remember. Like I almost like dissociated from my body when I like won the Red Bull Art of Motion, which was something that I was trying to do for years. But yeah, so I guess that's kind of my answer to that, if that makes sense.
As we've been on your career and journey, our listeners like to learn even more about the guests. Not looking at your career, what does Sydney like to do for fun when you're not doing stunts, when you're not doing parkour or anything? What do you like to do for fun?
Oh, for fun. I love going on walks. I love listening to podcasts. I love cooking. I'm like really passionate about cooking these days, cooking very healthy meals. My husband and I, we love going to coffee shops. That's just like one of our favorite things to do. We just like going and like reviewing coffee shops together. Yeah, hiking, just connecting with friends, really. I'm so blessed to have so many amazing friends, and we'll go out and we'll just like talk about our problems and all that. Like they're out. But yeah, it's kind of a beautiful thing. So I guess basically all of that is what I like to do for fun.
With cooking, what's that signature meal? What's that signature dish?
Signature dish right now, I would say it's this curry that I make. I love Indian food, so I can make a really, really good curry. And then recently I did this recipe for like a copycat Starbucks pumpkin bread, and I've been making it on repeat because it's very good.
Just sounds so good. I mean, everyone that's listening is probably going to be like, I'm hungry right now. They're going to go eat it. Especially you talked about the Starbucks item. It's like, I feel like a lot of like recipes that people are showcasing online is like taking a popular place and replicating it themselves because no one wants to go and pay, sorry, Starbucks, but like the $10 for a piece of bread or the
Yeah.
kind of the pastries. And it's like you make it at home and it tastes the same or even better. Do you feel that way? Because you talked about you and your husband love going to those coffee shops. Do you try to take what you get there and replicate it?
Absolutely. I'm actually very passionate about it because I've traveled a lot, and one of my favorite things to do is like find good meals that I like there and even try and replicate those at home. But I think my thing, it became a pandemic hobby. I remember I moved into an apartment during that time that didn't have a microwave, and I said, "Okay, I'm gonna get good at cooking. Like I need to figure." So yeah, I got really into just recreating meals that I thought were good, but making them healthier because a lot of times you go out to eat and the meals don't necessarily have the best ingredients. You don't always feel your best after eating them. So my thing is always like, how can I make this meal that is very indulgent and delicious? How can I make it actually enjoyable to eat, kind of guilt-free in that sense, and like I'll actually feel better after eating it and it'll satisfy that sweet tooth. So that's really kind of what my MO is with cooking.
That's how I am. And like, I'm a pizza guy. And
Mm.
you go to any pizza place and you're like, yeah, I can eat that whole large pizza easily. Like, it's no problem. But when I started making it at home using like different ingredients, different styles, and replicating it, it's like, why haven't I not been doing this for this long? Like, why is it taking me now to finally figure this out? And you talked about the pandemic, and it's like, I feel like the pandemic brought in out so many people's new skills or skills that they had in them, but they didn't really want to showcase it to a whole new level. And I feel like it was as much as the pandemic is its own thing, I think it brought out a lot of great things in people's skill sets. And you kind of talked about how cooking was that for you, but you still how cooking, but you still was doing flips and stuff and how it did not stop you. What do you see now as a thing that if you look back at your rise to the challenge, you want people to remember about you?
Oh gosh, that's a loaded one. I'm like trying to figure out what that might be for me even. About me specifically or just about life or
Anything. What do they want you to remember? The things that like the signature moves, the things, the personality, the accomplishments. It's not, it doesn't even have to be just one thing. It could be a multitude of things you want people to remember in your journey.
I really hope that eventually people will remember feeling good around me with themselves.
That,
That's really what I would love to be for people is someone that is inspiring for them, not just because of what I can do, but who I am and what I embody. And I really want to be that safe space for a lot of people to be able to come and talk to and feel vulnerable with, which is why I started my own podcast. But I think, yeah, on my journey, it's less about like what I'm capable of doing and more of just like what people feel around me. Like I want people to feel good and feel like, yeah, I think it's a good question because it's kind of like when you ask someone the question, when you die, what do you want people to remember? It's like, oh, she worked hard. Yeah, like no one cares about that, right?
yeah.
They care about like, oh my gosh, that person made me feel so good. Like I loved being around them.
Exactly. It's more of the impact in a way than the materialistic. It's like, oh, they did this career path or this, but it's more, you're not going to remember that after a couple years, but somehow
Yeah.
you'll be 10 years from now and you're like that moment or that kind of someone did something, their attitude reminds them of that person because there's similarity. It's like that person kind of came back into that person and it's like, you're still there no matter what.
Definitely. Yeah, I totally agree.
The final question I'll ask you for someone that's listening to this interview based on your journey and experience, what tips or advice would you give them to overcome obstacles, accomplish their goals, and rise to the challenge?
I think the biggest piece of advice that I have learned is just realizing there's nothing wrong with you as a person. I think a lot of times we get into our head, we're like, why haven't I been able to do this? Blah, blah, blah. Like, I really truly believe in the timing of everything. And that, as I said earlier, nothing that is meant for you will pass you by. So I think just lean into that trust and trust in yourself too. And realize that you are very capable. You can do absolutely anything that you set your mind to. I don't care how down you feel about yourself. It's time to realize that you can be whoever you want to be in this life.
Sydney, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show and talking about your rise to the challenge. You're inspiring so many people, and we are excited to see what the future looks like for you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Great conversation, and I hope you have a great rest of your night.
Tune in next time, hear my next guest talk about their rise to the challenge. Remember to follow and subscribe on all major audio platforms, and make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to see the full-length episode in video format. What path do you take to accomplish your goals? You decide.